Okay, what's going on there, YouTube? This is your boy Dark Spartan again, doing part 2 of my complete overview of my book collection. This one I'll be covering the Stephen King books. Got my list right here. I'll be showing you the books I have. I'll be mentioning the books I don't. So let's get started. And the first book I'm going to show you is actually the first book that Stephen King ever had published. It was published in 1974, and that is Carrie. And this is the movie tie-in version for the film that came out in 2013. There have actually been 3 adaptations of this book, plus 1 sequel. First, there was an adaptation done by Brian De Palma in 1976, and that led into a sequel that came out in and that was starring Sissy Spacek, Piper Laurie, Amy Irving, John Travolta, and that led into a sequel in 1997 called The Rage Carrie 2, which really just starred Amy Irving. She was the only returning cast member of that. And then in 2002 there was a made-for-TV miniseries starring, I believe it was Angela. It was Angela something. I can't remember her last name. And Patricia Clarkson as Margaret White. And then we got this one in 2013, which is starring Chloe Grace Moretz as Carrie and Julianne Moore as Margaret. So there's that one. And excuse me if I keep coming in and out of frame, it's because I'm going to be putting these back on the shelf. Okay, sorry about that. Next one we have is Salem's Lot, which was released in 1975. This was done adapted twice into a made-for-TV miniseries. The first time I believe was in either 78 or 79, and the second time was in the mid to late 2000s, which starred Rob Lowe. So there's that one. And okay, so the next one I'm going to be showing was released in 1977. This is actually one of his more popular books. This is The Shining. You see right here. This was adapted twice. Once for there's a major theatrical film in 1980, which was directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. And again in, I believe, the mid-90s, as a made-for-TV miniseries. It was starring Rebecca De Mornay and Steven Weber. And when I review this book, I'll go over all these books. I'll go over the film adaptations and stuff like that, and tell you what I thought of them. Particularly with this one, because there's a major difference between the 1980 movie and this, and I'll go over what I thought about that. So that is The Shining. The next one I'm going to go over is one I don't have. It is actually a book that was published under the Stephen King published under the name Richard Bachman. It's called Rage. It's actually the first book he ever wrote. I believe he wrote it when he was 18 years old, and you can't find it anymore because Stephen King pulled it off shelves, and because of the subject matter, it having to do with school shootings and stuff like that. So that was Rage. And the next one I'm going to show, if I find it, is my second favorite Stephen King novel. My cat's wondering what I'm doing. My second favorite Stephen King novel, The Stand. See how massive this book is. And this was adapted in the early 90s into a made-for-TV miniseries starring Gary Sinise, Molly Ringwald, and amongst others, Rob Lowe. And it is currently, I believe, in development at Warner Brothers to be turned into a movie. So there is The Stand. There. Okay, the next one I'm going to talk about is actually On the Stand was released in 1978. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. But the next book I'm going to mention is another one I don't have. It was another one that was published under the name Richard Bachman, and that is The Long Walk. And that is actually still available. My cat's trying to find a way down. Here you go. Sorry about that. But yeah, The Long Walk is, again, one I don't have. It was published under the name Richard Bachman. I believe it was one of the early books he wrote also. I believe he wrote that before he wrote Carrie. And yeah, so that's The Long Walk. The next one, again, is another one I don't have, which was released in 1979, called The Dead Zone. It's actually one of his more popular books. It was adapted into it's been adapted a couple times. It was adapted first into a movie, which I believe came out in 1982 or 83, and starring Christopher Walken and Martin Sheen, and it was directed by David Cronenberg, who's one of my favorite directors. And then it was adapted again in the, I believe, late 90s by USA Network into a TV series starring Anthony Michael Hall. So that is The Dead Zone. The next one I'm going to show is one I do have. And The Dead Zone was released in 1979, as was The Long Walk. So, sorry, I keep forgetting to mention the dates. The next one I'm going to show was released in 1980, and that is another one of my favorite books, Firestarter. I'm not really going to go into what these books are about. I'm just showing you them. This book was adapted into a movie back in the early 80s, starring Drew Barrymore, and then that's spawned a sci-fi TV miniseries sequel called Firestarter 2 Rekindled, and that actually had Malcolm McDowell in it, and it was actually pretty good. It was a pretty good miniseries. The movie, I know some people didn't like it. I personally do. Some people didn't like the book. I do. So that is Firestarter. And the next one is another one I don't have, actually. It was released in 1981. It is called Roadwork. It was published under the pseudonym Richard Bachman. It's another one of the Bachman books. Not one of the better Bachman books. Really not much I could say about it. But and that was released again in 1981. And the next one was also released in 1981, and it again is one I do not have, which is Cujo. A lot of people will remember the movie that came out in, I believe, 83 or 84, starring Dee Wallace. And everybody knows this is a story about the rabid dog. And that's that. The next one I'm going to show, where is it? Here we go. Is one I do have. It was released in 1982 under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, and that is The Running Man. This is the movie time version from the Schwarzenegger movie that came out in 1987. Again, one of the earlier books that he wrote. It was published much later. I believe he said in an interview he wrote this in 10 days during a school vacation. So, and again, I will be going over the difference between this and the movie because I do have the movie, and I will be showing my collection of Stephen King movies that I have. So there's The Running Man. And the next one is it was released, and The Running Man was released in 1982. The next one I have, sorry, I'm looking at my notes right here, so was also released in 1982, and that is The Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger. Now, if anybody's been paying attention to any entertainment news online within the last 24 hours, everybody will know that this is officially being made into a movie. It comes out January of next year, and it'll be starring Idris Elba as the Gunslinger, Roland Deschain, you see right there, and Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black, or as he's known by many other names in the Stephen King series, Randall Flagg, Walter O'Den, the Walking Dude. A lot of uproar over the casting of Idris Elba as the Gunslinger. I think it's great casting. He's a great actor. But there's Dark Tower 1, the Gunslinger. And the next one it came out in 1983, and that is Christine. As you see right there. This was adapted into a movie that came out in 1983 as well, starring John Stockwell. There's some others in it too. I can't remember the names at the moment. Keith Gordon, and it is of course and Alexandra Paul. There you go. There's the name of the stars. And it is of course about the haunted car. And again, I'll be going over the differences between this and the movie because I do have the movie. So love both, but there are some differences. So that is Christine. The next one I'm going to show you was also released in 1983, and is actually considered one of Stephen King's best novels, Pet Sematary. Yes, I know I do need to get another copy of this. I've had this since I was like 9 years old. So, and this was adapted into a movie that came out in, I believe, 1989. I believe it was 1989. Starring Dale Midkiff, Denise Crosby, Fred Gwynne, and was directed by Mary Lambert. The screenplay was actually written by Stephen King himself. This is, of course, about a family who finds out that they have about this pet cemetery, but beyond the pet cemetery, they find an Indian burial ground that brings the dead back to life, and shit goes down when the Micmac burial ground comes into play. So there you go. There's that one. The next one on that I'm going to talk about is one I do not have. It was released in 1983. It's called Cycle of the Werewolf. It is basically a werewolf story. It was adapted into a movie in the mid 80s, starring Corey Haim, called Silver Bullet, which I do have, and you'll see that when I do my my overview of my Stephen King movie collection. But it starred Corey Haim. It starred Gary Busey. So it's actually a pretty good movie. The effects are dated, but I like it. The next one on the list is another one I do not have. In fact, the next two I'm going to talk about I don't have. The first one being, it was released in 1984. It's called The Talisman. It is actually a book that he wrote with Peter Straub. Hasn't been adapted yet. Does connect to the Dark Tower series. I'll probably do another video talking about the Dark Tower movie, the Dark Tower story in itself, and which stories connect. Maybe how. It's really expansive, and So we'll see about that. And the one after that was also released in 1984, which is called Thinner. It was released under the name Richard Bachman. It was made into a movie in, I believe, 92 or 93. Starring, I can't remember his name. Why can't I remember his name right now? I think it was Robert Burke or something like that. It had Joe Mantegna in it. Really creepy novel, and I actually pretty much like the movie. Not as much as I did the book, but that's usually commonplace. Usually the books are better. The next one I'm going to talk about is my all-time favorite Stephen King novel. It was released in 1986. Sorry. It. I love this book. I love the miniseries with Tim Curry. It was adapted into a miniseries in 1990, starring Tim Curry, Jonathan Brandis, Seth Green was in it, John Ritter, a bunch of other TV stars were in it too. And I love both the book and the movie. I will do a comparison between the two at some point, because I do have the movie. So there's it. The next one I am going to be talking about is actually my first hardcover one I'm showing. And that is, and it was released in 1987, and that is The Eyes of the Dragon. This is not a horror story. This is actually more of a straight up fairy tale. Again, ties into the Dark Tower series. In fact, Randall Flagg, the villain from The Stand, is the villain in this. And excellent book. Has not been adapted yet. I would love to see this adapted, especially with today's visual effects technology and stuff like that. I think it would just be amazing. So there's his spine, back. There's Eyes of the Dragon. The next one I'm going to talk about is one I do not have, and that is The Dark Tower 2, The Drawing of the Three. It was released in 1987. It is the second part of the Dark Tower cycle. Again, we're getting the Dark Tower movie next year. Who knows if they will adapt parts of the Dark Tower 2. We do know that they're not going to actually go with the storyline from the Gunslinger. That it's going to start somewhere in the middle of the story. Maybe it'll start at Dark Tower 2 or something like that. Who knows? Sorry, just center myself here. Sorry about that. So that's the Dark Tower 2. Next one I'm going to be talking about is another one of my favorites. Misery. Love this book. This is the book about the obsessive fan, Annie Wilkes, who basically takes her favorite author hostage and tortures the shit out of him. It was adapted into a movie in 1990, directed by Rob Reiner, starring Kathy Bates and James Caan. Kathy Bates, of course, won the Academy Award for Best Actress that year for her role in this. Well deserved. I mean, she was fucking amazing in this. So, in the movie, I do not have it. I wish I did. I've been searching everywhere for it. I might have to get it online somewhere. So that is Misery. The next one, Misery, was released in 1987. The next one I'm going to talk about was also released in 1987. It was one I used to have. I do not have it anymore. I do not know what happened to it. Maybe it's in a box somewhere, one somewhere. So who knows? But that is the Tommyknockers. Tommyknockers is basically a pure science fiction story. It's almost like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, really. It was adapted into a TV miniseries in the early 90s, starring Jimmy Smits. Miniseries was okay. I mean, Tommyknocker is really not one of my favorite stories. Next one was released in 1989, and that is The Dark Half. I know the cover's all tore up. I've had this one for a long time too. This is actually the movie tie-in version. This is about it's kind of hard to explain. It's basically about an author who finds out these murders are happening, and and the person claiming to commit these murders is using the pseudonym he writes under when he writes his books. And this was made into a movie in the early 90s. I don't know what year. It doesn't say on here what year the movie was made. But it starred Timothy Hutton. It was directed by George A. Romero. George A. Romero, of course, being the guy who created the Night of the Living Dead series. He's actually done a couple collaborations with Stephen King. So that is The Dark. I actually like this book. It's actually a really good book. Movie, not so much. But I do like the book. So there's The Dark Half. Next one I'm going to talk about was released in 1991. It is actually another book I do not have. It is The Dark Tower 3, The Wastelands. And that's all I will say about it, because we know the Dark Tower movie is coming next year. So sorry, I'm just looking for my books here. I'm trying to find one. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that. I got all my books laying on the bed right here. The next one I'm going to show is this one right here. Needful Things, or as it says, The Last Castle Rock Story. Stephen King has released a couple of books that were based in the town of Castle Rock, this being the last one that particularly takes place in that town. He's mentioned it in books since then. This was made into a movie in the mid-90s, starring Ed Harris, Bonnie Bedelia, had Max von Sydow playing the villain Leland Gaunt. Really good book. I did kind of enjoy the movie. I loved Max von Sydow's performance. So, and again, that was released in 1991. So there is Needful Things. Excuse me. The next one I'm going to talk about is another one I don't have. It was released in 1992. It's called Gerald's Game. It has not been adapted into a film yet. At least I don't think it has. It's basically about this woman who goes to this cabin with her husband, to have sex and stuff like that, and he ends up handcuffing her to the bed, and he, in the middle of them having sex, he has a heart attack and dies, and she ends up spending days on end trapped in this cabin by herself. It was actually written as a companion piece, because there is kind of a link to the next book I'm going to talk about, which was also released in 1992, and that is called Dolores Claiborne. Like I said, there is a link between this and Gerald's Game. I'm not going to say how or what that link is. This was adapted into a movie in 1995, starring again Kathy Bates as Dolores Claiborne, starred Jennifer Jason Leigh and Christopher Plummer. Excellent movie, excellent book, one of Stephen King's better books, and honestly one of the better adaptations of his work. So there is Dolores Claiborne. Okay, next one we're talk about was released in 1994, and that is Insomnia. A lot of mixed reviews on this book. I personally like it. I like the fact that it ties into the Dark Tower series and it introduces a hugely important character to the Dark Tower in this book. So, and it has not been adapted into a movie yet, at least not that I'm aware of. So there is Insomnia. And the one I'm going to talk to you about discuss after that was released in 1995, and that is Rose Matter. As you can see, it says right there, Rose Matter. This one's actually it's been missing the dust jacket for a long time, even though I bought it brand new. I don't know what happened to the dust jacket. Hasn't been adapted into a film yet. I hope not, because it is not. It is one of my least favorite Stephen King books. As far as my least favorite Stephen King books go, this would be number 2 on my least favorite list. Number 1, which I'll show you a little later. So that is Rose Matter. The next one I'm going to talk about was released in 1996. It was actually released as a serial, and it is The Green Mile. It was adapted in, I believe, 1999 as a movie starring Tom Hanks and the late great Michael Clarke Duncan. It was directed by Frank Darabont, who is again is a frequent collaborator with Stephen King. I do not have that book. I wish I did. I do have the movie, so you'll be seeing that in my overview of my Stephen King films. And that's it as far as The Green Mile goes. The next one I am going to talk about was also released in 1996. And that is Desperation. And this again ties into the Dark Tower series. I'm not going to say how. It's actually a pretty good book. It was adapted in the early 2000s into a made-for-TV movie starring Ron Perlman. So I'm going to get some more light in here. Okay, here. Starring Ron Perlman. Movie wasn't that good. Ron Perlman was excellent though in it. So close this. Not too much glare. So there's Desperation. And that was actually written as a companion book to this one right here, The Regulators, which was, as you can see, published under the name Richard Bachman. And if you look, you can see that these two covers actually connect together to form one image. This one has not been adapted yet, so actually it's a pretty good book. It's not one of the not one of the best Bachman books, but you know, it is pretty good. The next one I'm going to talk about is another one I don't have. It is The Dark Tower 4, Wizard and Glass, which happens to be my favorite of the Dark Tower books. And we'll just leave it at that. Next one on that, and The Dark Tower 4 was released in 1997, by the way. And then the next one after that was released in 1998. This is another book I do not have, which is Bag of Bones. And that was adapted, I believe, about 4 years ago into a made-for-TV miniseries on, I believe it was A&E, starring Pierce Brosnan. It was actually a pretty good miniseries. Directed by, I believe it was Mick Garris, who again is another frequent King collaborator. In fact, he directed the miniseries to the 1997 miniseries adaptation of The Shining. So that is actually, or was it The Shining? Or no, The Stand. No, I believe it was The Stand, not The Shining. I'm sorry about that. And that is it for Bag of Bones. Sorry, my cat's jumping up on the counters over there. Next one I'm going to show was released in 1999, and that is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. This is the paperback version. It's one of his shorter books. It's a pretty good book. Again, hasn't been adapted yet. I liked it. It's basically about a girl who's lost in the woods. She happens to be a huge Red Sox fan, particularly the player Tom Gordon, who was the closer at the time this book was written, I believe. So there's Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Next one I'm going to show is my least favorite book that Stephen King has ever written. It is, and it was released in 2001, and it is Dreamcatcher. I don't know what to say about this book. It was bad. it was bad. I'm not gonna say I hated it, but I did not like it. There's some cool moments in here that relate to other Stephen King works. It was adapted into a movie in the early 2000s, starring Morgan Freeman, Thomas Jane, amongst others. And the movie was even worse, if you could believe that. But that is Dreamcatcher, and we're actually going to stop right here, and I will make another video showing you the rest of the books. So I'll see you guys then.